Welcome everyone, and to continue with the topic of pull requests, let's now discuss about the top issues that could be found in pull requests or during the pull request review process, and just to be prepared for them and how to avoid them. But before we do that, let's have a quick sip of coffee. As you noticed, I'm trying to change the style of my videos every now and then, and let's see what will work the best and what you like the most. On top of that, just as a quick note in advance, this video will be a little bit more interactive if you want it to be so. And there will be an opportunities for you to pause the video and just take a look at the code and guess what is wrong with this code that I'm presenting right now, and what you would highlight as incorrect thing before I go into those. And without further ado, let's dive right into the top issues that can be found in, and quick drum roll, terraform code. But on top of that, in this example, I will use also the just general issues that could be found, and those are possible for any language, and it doesn't really stand for the Terraform code or Java code or C Sharp or any other stuff. So this piece of a beautiful code. So as you can see, I have three examples prepared. One of them is Terraform, and all of those examples are not probably not really compilable, but just a quick snippet of one file that could be changed. And imagine that you are a professional and you receive a pull request from someone with this uh, change to be merged in the main. And it doesn't really matter what is the other parts of the pull request. So let's focus on the code itself. Uh, and because I said that, let me start with, I have a list actually of pull request issues that I wanted to highlight. And one of the latest ones in the general category is actually the lack of documentation. And usually you would say that your code is the best documentation, but it's always a good idea to have something on a README file or in a Confluence. And I mentioned that in my previous video about the pull requests. On top of that, I'm completely ignoring the merging part of it. If the file is mergeable or need to be first rebased and fixed all of the conflicts that are possible over there, or if there would be a bit too much of the changes. So one of the top issues with the pull request that it's really good when they are small and you don't need to go through hundreds of files and thousands and thousands of changed lines of code, because it would be impossible to stay focused on that type of content for long. So lack of documentation and commit messages and the size of the pull requests, all of those parts are already ignored by me. And let's now go into the Terraform code. With this one, if you want, you can take a quick pause, press a stop, and check what you would change. But the very first thing that I would notice over here is actually would be the conventions, and this is a generic thing for all of the other languages too. And usually you have a certain style that you need to follow, and quite often you need to enforce that style with dflint or other linting tools or the prettier for front end and so on. So there are a plethora of tools available, and over here this name of the resource, it's actually not a good one, and dashes are not really accepted by the, let's say, community. So that is the first one, not following the naming convention, and this will be one of the red flags for the pull request to be asked to be fixed before it could be merged. Next, the second thing that stands out right away, it is actually from that line of code. Uh, and The bad thing is that you could hard code secrets, sensitive data, and some sort of a configuration. So, for example, like connection string. And this is not good, first of all, because it is static and you cannot really change the behavior of your application. And secondly, just leaking those secrets, it is so much easier from your code base than from your actual application. And having them hard coded, it's a big no go. And if this one can be overlooked, technically speaking, this one should never be overlooked and always should be restricted. There are also tools available to fix those on the fly or just automatically check before the pull request can be accepted. But I'm not going to cover them in this video, and this will be just a quick overview of what can be fixed. The next thing that is once again generic is the input validation. And in terms of the terraform is that it is possible to have variables that would be fed further into your application, into your code, and used down the stream, but you might not have a proper validation. And for example, over here, I'm just, as an example, created a variable for the environment, which is a string with a default value of empty string, which is questionable. And just a quick description, what is this variable for? But the good thing that could be used or can be added is a validation. So something like this would be much better with the tools that are available from the provider, from the HashiCorp straight away. Next item on my list that I wanted to highlight is this one. And sorry that I'm jumping back and forth through that whole code, but it just whatever first comes to mind on this prepared example. And basically, this thing I more or less copied from the HashiCorp itself, from the example how to use the app service plan. So the next thing is this one, as I said, this line. And here it is, I would call it the improper dependency management. And this one is specifically for Terraform, but you can easily imagine something similar to this in other languages. So for example, in Java world, if you would use if you would not use a dependency injection and instead just initiate the class straight away without the interface and so on, it makes, first of all of your code quite rigid and on top of that much harder to test. In terms of the Terraform, here you don't really know what is the application service plan ID is. And in this example, I wanted to highlight that it could be this Azure Service Plan that was created first, and then you just use the hard-coded ID, which obviously would be of a different format, but still, it is something that you don't really want to have. And actually, what might happen over here is that you have some sort of improper state management, and the resources would be created in from local execution, but not saved in the shared plan, or you don't use a shared plan at all, and the plan could be committed to your Git repository or many other things that can go wrong. But I will quickly highlight them a little bit later, and I will show you the slide that I am using as a reminder for myself. All right. The next thing that is once again general for all of the languages, but in this example, I'm going to use a Terraform for this, is the usage of unstable or deprecated issues. And in all languages, there would be something that is deprecated because most of the languages actively being developed and things getting better and better, I hope, with time. And over here, I'm actually using the Azure RM App Service as a resource type. But actually, Microsoft themselves, they changed their provider, that is Azure RM provider over here. And in the latest version of it, it will actually start to complain that the Azure RAM App Service is deprecated and will be removed from the provider code from version 4, if I'm not mistaken, and that you need to use the Azure App Service for Linux or for the Windows specifically. Here in this code, I'm using some deprecated issue that is not going to be supported for long, and the code base itself, if that would be merged into main, would become quite dependent on the version of the provider that is used, and it wouldn't be that easy to update to the latest and the newest version of it. All right, another sip of coffee, just to keep the pace a little bit slower, I hope, and we can quickly take a look at additional things that I wanted to highlight, and those would be specifically for the Terraform, and they would be for the improper state management, and that would be mostly from the setup of your pipeline. Or another example, as I said, would be that you just commit your state file into the Git repository and run all of the changes. So Terraform plan and apply locally only. That is probably not even an issue with a pull request, and instead just a general approach to your deployment procedure. Then the lack of locking for the state files. So if you have not implemented the lock mechanism, which is actually implemented by default in most cases, it would be possible that two of the processes try to access this log file, state file at the same time without locking it, and actually write to it, and the state file would be corrupted in that case. Next thing is unnecessary resource recreation, and this is based on specific resources. So you could configure the resource that way in Terraform that it will be recreated all of the time, and it just additional time that would be spent doing something that is not really needed. Uh, Security misconfiguration. So as a DevOps professional and pragmatic DevOps professional, I hope it would be good to always think about the security and what can be done better. So, for example, with Azure resources, it would be good to introduce virtual networks and limit access to your application service plans or for your web apps only for specific services, if possible, or just implement their firewall rules and backup strategies and stuff like that. So all of that needs to be considered and taken into account. And the last, but definitely not least, is the lack of tags. And that's actually, once again, in this example, it is always a great idea to have tags defined uh, on resource. And even better if those are defined on a resource group, so the topmost and then propagated down the line, so you don't repeat yourself many times or too many times, and at least call what is the environment that is being used and what is the project name for this setup and so on. So it would be much easier to later query your resources from your cloud provider and be able to, for example, check the budget and what are the biggest money spenders in terms of your resources based on the environment, based on the project, and so on. Uh, so this is about the Terraform. And then next we are going to jump to Java thing. And here, once again, I created a quick example class, and you can pause your video right now, and we can take a look what is happening over here together. Number one, same as before, it was for the hard-coded passwords and configuration. So this connection string, it is quite just hard-coding to the local host. And if your application is supposed to be executed on different environments, which is most likely the case, this needs to be configurable and changed between different execution of your application. And in general, it is a good idea to be able to compile your code once, but then use it in many environments. That way you can trust that your code is actually tested thoughtfully in different environments, but different by different people, and you have more trust in it that it is going to work as expected in your production environment, which is the most important one. Then the next thing in this code is that we have hard-coded the query tree, and just in general the usage of this kind of approach to run queries. It is good for some sort of a quick and dirty proof of concept projects, but I actually wouldn't use it in real world applications. And in that case, it would be much better to just use extensively existing frameworks. In case of Spring Boot, JPA repositories and Hibernate would be the first thing that would come to my mind. And that actually goes even further with this result set reading specifically by ID. If you have typed objects, data transfer object, that would be much cleaner and safer for you. Then in this code example, at least we have a try catch block, which is a good thing, and quite often that would be a missing bit from the pull request review when something that could happen actually not caught correctly, but still in that case we just output the stack trace into the uh, output, and that's not good enough, and it's always better to have a proper login, so if something like that would happen in your production environment, you would be able to catch it later on and investigate what was the issue. uh, Then, in terms of other issues that possible, that you need to think about your database queries and try to avoid, or you have to avoid the n plus one complexity, where you would just think that it's a simple query, but instead it would basically merge the whole database to output only a tiny bit of data that is required. Then, if you are not using the framework, as I said, and exception handling and login practices. So, in this example, actually, it would be good from the login perspective to be able to see that this method actually is being used, because usually the classes or methods, they would encapsulate some sort of a business requirement that you are working on, and it would be awesome to be able to just investigate how often certain feature is used and with what queries, and if it is being used at all. And with this kind of login right now, well, and this, uh, but it's kind of a response. So I would expect something like a return statement over here instead of a void. But what I wanted to say is that if you are able to prove that your feature is used and how often, and what is the general mood about this feature, if possible, then if you have multi-threaded application and you implement blocking, and thread management might be hard, but that's a whole different story. And on top of that, to improve the performance of your application, you need to think about your caching strategy. The last but not least, if someone would present me a class like that for a pull request review, the very first question that I would ask, and probably I should have started with this, but I'm sorry, is where are the unit tests? So we have some methods over here in this class, and as you can see in this example, I have no unit tests at all, no integration tests with the database connection, and no end-to-end testing, and all of those are basically required. So if the code is not covered by tests, it's not a valid code, and no one would be able to convince me that this code is doing what it is supposed to be doing, even if it is the simplest function that would subtract one number from another. It still needs to be tested, and the Unit tests actually could be served as part as a documentation as well, because you would have some proper use cases in those tests that you would be verifying if the code is doing the correct job or not. Well, with this, my last bit, and I hope that I'm not going too fast with my presentation, but I don't want to have the video to be too long. So the last one is Angular in my example, and here once again I have a quick standalone component available. And what is going on here is that the first thing that while it is possible to have those templates for the component presented like this, it's still for me not the best practice, and it's better to split the template and the styling, so this can be considered as a hard coding to a certain extent, I would guess, into the separate classes, separate files. So to have a CSS file separate and the HTML template file separate to the actual TypeScript code of the component. That would be my first question, even though the template itself is that simple. Anyway, it's much easier to understand and read what is going on with different files, at least my opinion. Then the next thing is that we have here, as usual, the hard-coded URL, and it's better to be provided by different service or by the environment variable between different runs. The next thing is that over here I still have the error handling, and it could be missing in case of just incorrect coding. Well, it is still correct, but it is not a good style of coding, so errors should be handled. And still, in this component, in this class, I have no logs at all, not even into the console log. And this is something that needs to be updated. On top of that, as we discussed with JavaScript, with Java code, there is no unit or end-to-end test available for this class, which is a big no for me. Next thing that could happen is that we have subscribe over here, and in this case it is probably fine, but in many situations you would have an observable from different class or from different provider, and it would be good to actually unsubscribe from those observable when your class is no longer needed. So something like this is a good thing to have. Then insufficient state management. So if in this case the state itself is just a message and we have here the loading, but imagine that this thing is not provided as a default one, and what should happen in case of the error, and just in general how the application should react to the state of this component and to this uh, property in general. Uh, Performance issues due to change detection. So you need to think about the performance of your application, and front end actually quite easy to test it, but I will focus only on the code review and not how to test the performance right now. But if you would be able to implement better performance uh, management for your application, basically a big plus for you, and you need to follow your current conventions as well within your team, or at least to accept that you are going to improve something. Uh, yes. And user validation, security practices, and user validation actually stands double for the front-end applications, because usually that's from where the user can interact with your application, and you need to test what user actually is uh, typing in. And then some sort of optimization of your whole Angular project. But because here I have only a single class, that's outside of the scope for this one. But basically, your project JSON file needs to be clean and good, and all of the dependencies, basically everything that I said before. And this list, I don't want to just play some sort of PowerPoint karaoke right now, so you can check this one. I hope it wasn't too bad in terms of the ending, and you liked this video and it was uh, helpful to someone. So please like and subscribe to my channel, and see you later. Cheers.